I'm just going to try and plug in this remote. See if it works. Oh, nope. Thank you all for being here. So with 30 minutes, I'll try to breeze through and make sure we save lots of time for questions. For those of you who don't know, Housing is an online real estate platform. And we started from the idea that there should be an easier and more efficient way to find a house, to rent or to buy. And since then, we've grown from there. So our objective now really is to be the ultimate platform for real estate in India. So Housing's a big organization now. Like, we've grown a lot in the 3 years. And I work as part of the data team. Now, the neat thing about Housing, just real quickly, as sort of a context, is that whereas the way a lot of startups progress is they'll start out with some of the more basic functions of business analytics or product analytics, and then later on, as they grow and they get resources, they build out data science. At Housing, it sort of jumped in head first and created a data science lab before a business intelligence unit, before product analytics, or any of your more standard analytics teams. And that's been a huge advantage in the sense that they were able to get in on the ground floor, but also show that there's sort of a company-wide commitment to the way we use data. So jumping to 2015, in 2015 we merged, we sort of grew out and thought about how do we scale the data science capabilities into a comprehensive data and intelligence group. And so, yeah, that's where we are now. Now, but before I go much further, I just want to give you a brief sketch of what we'll talk about. So I'll start with just giving you a sense of the three main types of contribution, how we focus our work in data science at Housing. And then I'll give you a few examples. And then once we've looked at some examples in depth, hopefully, and that'll be probably the most interesting part of the talk, we'll step back a little bit and think about the abstract problem-solving structure that we use. Because once you get a lot of problems, how you think about that at a more holistic level is important. And then we'll just quickly run through how we integrate with the broader company, because that's the key thing. It's data science on its own is not what's valuable. Data science applied to decisions made for your business or for your users or your consumers, that's where the value is. And I think we've learned some things along the way, and that's really been an exciting part of the journey as well. And then quickly, I'll just also talk about data and tech infrastructure, because that's the objective, right? Setting it up, and we'll talk about why that's the objective, why that provides so much value. And then we'll get to questions. Okay, so our three main areas of contribution that we think about are, so our first is improving decision-making across our company. I think that's pretty standard. But one thing it's interesting is Housing, while it's an online company, right, it's a tech company, it has a huge ground force, because every listing on the site is verified. We have data collectors in the field, and so there's a pretty intensive operational footprint, and optimizing that and thinking about that is important. The next thing, of course, is our main goal is enabling our customers to make, and our consumers to make, users to make better decisions. And we'll think about like some of the ways that choosing where to live is a complex task, and how we can apply data to solve that. And then the third thing is really this newer thing, right? We start as a rental and buy a real estate company for users, and then we think, how do we take all that data and how do we develop new data products across the industry? So banks to help approve home loans, or developers to help them choose where the next development project are. Or how do we take commute times and things like that and scale it to think about transit planning or urban planning. Urbanization is obviously like a key area for growth and development in India, and we want to be a part of that as well. Okay, so let's just jump in and think first about some of the ways we might help users make decisions. So one of the things is that when you come and you decide to rent a house or buy a house, you can think about sort of all this conditionality, where all the different features you could pay attention to. And some of them are here. And if you get into it, very quickly you realize it can get very complex, right? It's just factorial. How do you exchange all these different features and choose what is your priority? What do you care about most? And so one of the main things that are pretty standard, right, is just to think about placement. So for instance, how do we go from this, avoid the paradox of choice, avoid overwhelming users from the start, and think about what do they care about most, what's at the top. And this is key. Because like any online platform, any e-commerce type platform, you only have a small amount of time to help users achieve their objective. They're not going to spend more than that. And so you want to get right to the point. And then allow them to burrow deeper as they choose. And at the same time, we also can think about how do we ensure users have choices available. So we've just recently achieved in August 1 million houses, verified listings on housing. And that was pretty exciting, but that enables us to have scale. But it's, so that's a key thing for us. And we, like I said, we go out in the field and we have data collectors who are using an app we built and go out and collect around 60 to 7 features for every listing. And that's pretty exciting as well. But then we have to ask, because you can just get focused on the numbers, and how do we know we're collecting the properties that people are really looking for? And this is really the key challenge in real estate, is connecting supply and demand. So one of the things we can do, and this is going to be a recurring theme, is how do you take one problem that you solve and apply the lessons you've learned from it in another area? So when you saw those filters, right, when we look at what people pay attention to, we also look at what kind of price sensitivity you have. Where are they looking there? And then what we can do is say, look at our inventory regularly and compare it to our demand. And we can say, where's the mismatch? In what cities do we have mismatch? Where are we? And across all kinds of dimensions. This, for example, is price. And so you can kind of see here, like in Delhi and Mumbai, more recently, we tended to end up being more skewed to the lower end of the market. Because our data collector teams were going out and working with brokers, and they were getting their numbers up, but they were working at large-scale brokers that were on the low end. They had a lot of flats, right, but they're all the same cheap, small flats. And they're collecting them. So if we just look at those numbers, right, we don't understand what the right inventory to collect is. Whereas, say, in Kolkata and Bangalore, we've been doing a lot better there. So then we can ask, so how do we optimize our resource expenditure? One way is optimizing the routes of the data collectors who go out and collect flats. But another one is an interesting problem of call masking. So maybe you're not familiar with what call masking is. Basically, if you find a flat you like, right, you can ask for a contact. You can fill out a contact request form, or you can call someone. And you can see that this is a flat listed by an agent, and there's this number. But that's not his number. That's a masked number. So for every flat on our site, we provide contact information, but we mask it with a number that we acquire from Reliance, so that the call is routed through that and then gets to the end. Now we do that for a lot of reasons. We do that to prevent competition, scraping our listings, but also to protect privacy and of owners, especially for owner-listed properties. But we also do it for the data, because we think about data as a resource to invest in. And when we do this, now we're able to know when a broker gets called and how long the call goes for, and whether they're answering it or whether they're missing it, what are the patterns, et cetera. So, okay, so we've got that data, and then we can say, oh, well, the tricky thing is with the scale, with the growth, right? So now, in the last couple of months, we've been adding up to 4,000 listings of properties a day across India. And they all need to be masked. So how do we mask them efficiently? Because if we just mask, it's expensive. If we just mask a number and then let it go for the next 2 or 3 months, then we're spending a lot. And do we need to? So here's our problem, right? Now we can think about how we would solve it. And this is part of our approach process. First, we always start with exploratory analysis. We don't know exactly what we don't jump into modeling, because we need to understand the underlying data. So for instance, and that involves a lot of plotting. We do a lot of visual analysis at housing. So here, for instance, is we can just look at owner and broker call traffic across the 24-hour period. And you can just notice a couple of things, right? Owners tend to get a lot more calls, but the pattern across the day is very consistent. The key thing here is just that there's patterns there. You're going to access them later with your model, but you can begin to see that they're there and where they are. Another one might be is over time. It's right, not just across the day, but over time. So as an owner gets more calls, right, the percentage of calls that they miss or don't answer goes up. And we want to know that, like, when they stop answering the calls, it potentially means the flat's listed. That's when we should stop masking it, right? And ideally, we should stop masking it when it's not going to get any more calls. We stop masking it, we stop paying for it. Okay, so can we predict when a property will stop getting calls? And if so, we can unmask it without losing leads. Great. So it turns out if you take a different data, and again, remember, it's all about linking the different problems you solve together. So we can take that demand data we have, and we can use that as part of our feature sets for the modeling of when a flat gets listed. Because if it's a flat that corresponds to the profile of that area, the kind of flat that people are looking for, we would expect it to rent faster, right? And this just shows you sort of results. As we unmask calls here across the x-axis, right, the number of properties called and the number of leads missed obviously goes up because our model isn't perfect. But if we do a daily unmasking of around 20% of our inventory, so that's about 2,000 flats, right, then we end up losing about 5 leads. So it's an acceptable error. And the result is that we save around 1/8 to 1/5, depending on how much we unmask, and it can go up depending on how much we're willing that trade-off to lose leads versus spending money on phone number masking. Okay. So another question we have to ask a lot is, how long will it take to rent a flat? And this again is a related problem, but it's separate. So say you go on the fly. Take it first from a user's perspective, because our objective is to help our users make better decisions. Say you find the right flat and you get excited. It's exactly what you were looking for. You want it, but it's no longer available. You call and it's not there anymore. It was rented. That's a problem that we want to avoid. So we want to deactivate a flight from the site as soon as it gets rented or bought. Right. And again, going back to looking at our overall inventory, as it grows, that becomes more complex. You can't call every single flat and ask them, is it every day, is it been rented? So we need to do that algorithmically. And, right, when to deactivate them. And we have to think about what our data sources are. So it'd be wonderful, and it's built into the process for brokers and owners, if everyone notified us as soon as a flat was rented. But they don't, because owners forget. They have a lot of other things to do, and they're excited they rented the flat, but they're not always going to get back online and notify us of that. And brokers will also forget, but also brokers will intentionally leave the flat up, right? Because they want more leads. So then we take different measures. We can do things like allow our users to contribute and report when a flat's already taken, but that ends up being like 15% of the time. It doesn't work completely. So it is a modeling problem. So we can predict when a flat will rent. And we can think about the features, and we can say apartment features might be integrated in the model, and demand profile. Again, so here we've solved one problem for understanding what our overall inventory is by looking at what the demand profiles are for different areas. Now we can integrate that as a feature into this problem solving. And then we can also look at the call trends that it's receiving. And remember, we already tackled the call problem as a separate problem, but that ends up being feature engineering for a new problem. Okay, so fun insights interlude, just really quickly. One of the things we found, what we looked at was what kind of features correspond to shorter lifetimes. And yeah, this is fun. So in Mumbai, if you have an air conditioner, which you should understand, you're going to rent quite a bit faster than and not. Noida, right, if you have gym, right? Whereas in Bangalore, it's the opposite. If you have access to sports facility, it tends to go down. Maybe that's because it's a tech city. I know our team doesn't always get the time to work out, right? Delhi is very sensitive to security deposit. This Hyderabad one is interesting because Vastu, like eastern-facing houses, ends up being really important. And so it's not just an age-old tradition. It's actually quite predictive of short lifespans. So this kind of thing is fun to see and also potentially interesting to share with our customers so they can understand what would cause them to have a lower lifetime. And ultimately, it lets us make sure the inventory is fresh, and simultaneously, then we can think about other products, like, for instance, letting our owners know how long we expect it to be up. Like, how long do you think it'll be before you rent or sell your property? And then the key thing is once you solve this decision process, this expansion into crossing the industry is where it gets really exciting as well, because now there's like all kinds of deeper level questions you can get into. One question, for instance, is what kind of return on investment can you get from a rental property? So what we need to do here is combine rental and resale inventory, and that means you have to match properties. Right? So we don't know what the rental yield is until we say, here's this flat for sale and this flat for rent, and we match them on locality or building name and certain features that allows us to infer the rental yield for that flat. Okay, so quickly, just for those who aren't so familiar with investing or real estate, so over the past few decades, real estate's it's a good investment, right? But a lot of people think about capital appreciation. Over 10 years, how much the value of your house is going to grow. But the problem is that there's issues there. It's not always certain that you're going to have appreciation. Your assets are illiquid, right? You can't exchange them. It's just basically held in the value of the property over time. So an alternative option would be to invest in rental real estate properties. So that's where, say, the monthly rental return contributes to your value in addition to the appreciation. And this can actually help you fund the investment. So you can buy and then use the rental return as a way of paying off the mortgage, et cetera, making it worth. Okay, it gets a bit complex, but basically if you buy a property for 12 lakhs and you were at a monthly rent of 10, then your gross rental yield would be about 10%. So 10% of the value of the property. Okay, interesting. So let's say if you were going to do that, where would you buy? So in Bangalore, for instance, we can look. And we can see and so what we have here is our rental yields. And typical rental yields are around 2 to 3%. When you get above 4, it gets pretty exciting. Like that's generally considered more high. And what we can look at is over time. So from lighter to darker is more further back to more recent. And we can see quarter 2 of 2014 to quarter 3 of 2015. And you can see a pretty consistent trend upward. Rental yields are growing. Like this is good. But maybe this is standard picture, I mean, without context, right? So let's just look at Mumbai real quick. And we see, no, not such a good trend in Mumbai. It's not really going anywhere. It's the same every year, same every quarter. Okay, so let's stick with Bangalore, right? And we can ask, are good yields associated with certain localities, or is it distributed evenly, right? Is there an area of Bangalore where we can look into? Well, you can look at different things. One is the per square feet rate of resale properties, and when you plot it, you actually begin to see, oh, there might be something there. So as a property gets more exciting, more expensive, the rental yield tends to go down. You capture less of that value in rent because people aren't willing to pay for it. Generally, people want to rent something affordable, not something expensive, right? Okay, so let's look at based on rental yield, top localities in Bangalore, and we see, okay, wow. Hulumavu, I don't know how to pronounce that, but that has a rental yield of 6.27%. That's pretty good. That's exciting. So let's say, what can we take from the work we've already done to contribute? Remember, that's the recurring theme. Oh, we can take the demand-supply stuff, right? And now we can say, across this locality, what's our demand-supply? And we see that actually there's an oversupply there. Right? It's just, it's a good rental return if you can rent it, but there's a lot of people trying to rent in that area, trying to rent their flats, right? And not so much demand. People aren't really looking there. Okay, so now we should step back. We should go back to our list, and if we do, we can sort of see next option is electronic city. So let's look at electronic city. Interesting. Here, demand is much more in par with supply. In fact, it matches it a bit. That's good. And we can say if we were going to look across bedroom configurations, the 2 and 3 bedrooms seem to be where there's some potential here. Okay, so then we can also look at price, right? And we can see somewhere there in 10 to 11,000 a month is where the highest demand for rent is, and that's pretty exciting. So okay, so that's where we should buy. So if we come down to a recommendation, very simply, 2-3 bedroom flat in electronic city in Bangalore. And if you renting at rupees 11 to 15,000, you're probably going to look at a 30 to 40 lakh purchase price. So it's interesting, right? It's early days here on this work, but I think it's pretty exciting. Okay, so let's step back from examples for a bit. And so we said there's so many problems to solve. There's so many things you could do. How do we structure and frame the problem solving? Okay, so I like this quote from Max Tegmark. He's a famous physicist, and he says, if you have a tough question that you can't answer, first tackle a simpler question that you can answer. And we always try to tackle questions we can't answer because that makes us know we're still being ambitious. But here's how we think about it. Every problem, every question you ask is sort of the problem space. And if you try to tackle that problem space, you're going to quickly run into morass because when you actually start to break it down, think about it, there's so much there you don't know. It doesn't matter how much data you have. There's lots more data that you don't have. So instead, we first break it down into the smallest part possible, solve that, and then build outward from there. Okay? And let's just look at this in an example. So property evaluation is a great example. Everyone always wants to know, what's the value of a flat? And we would love to tackle that problem. But if you think valuation, what the value of a flat is, so many sub-problems. So for instance, what's the demand for it in that particular area, right? In which we're trying to solve. And what kind of demand is it in terms of getting the calls it's getting? And then we can also say, how long is it going to stay on the market? Because there's no right price. Prices are not determinate. They're just a market signal. So if you're willing to wait, maybe you get a higher price, but maybe you're not willing to wait. So the lifetime is important. You want to know, if I list it at this price, how long is it going to stay before it sells? And if I lower it, how much faster can I get rid of it? And rental yields, for instance, might be an important question to ask. And if you look, these problems begin to be connected. Okay, that's key, because if everyone's tackling their own thing, then you're making a mistake. Then you're losing ground. So everyone's tackling something that connects to every other problem, and you try to maintain that interconnected sort of network of solutions, then you're on good ground. Okay, but obviously it's difficult. Everyone's working on their own project. They don't have time for meetings every day, right? So how do we do it? Well, there's a lot of different ways we do it, but I did want to include just one, because for me it's very important. Is the tools you use. And so for us, we're mostly a Python shop. We do a lot of analytics in Python. And if you're familiar with Python, or you might want to check these out. It used to be IPy notebooks, IPython notebooks. Now it's Jupyter notebooks. But the point is that when you're doing the analysis, you want it to be visible. You want it to be discoverable. So you want your discussion, the way you think through the problem, to be directly connected to the way you solve that problem. And it needs to be accessible in a way so that anyone can go in, and your peers within the team can go in and see what you did. If it's buried in these dense scripts that no one has time to read, then it's lost. And then they can't hold you accountable, and they can't learn from what you're doing. So this is sort of, okay, so you can put your documentation in it, and you can combine your code with your documentation, with your problem solving. It's there. You can minimize it and hide it if you want to focus just on the problem. But if you want to see the code, if you say, if someone's presenting their work and they say, we did this, and it's like, wait, did you really do that? Let's see. Because sometimes people mess this step up. That kind of example. Okay, so that's just a brief aside, which I think is important. Generally, though, it's really just quickly, it really is integrating the problems and solving the problems is about the people you have. This is where we get to the organization stage. And there's a couple of things we try to do. So first, to me, it's like motivation is key. Analytics can take a long time. They can run in 6-month cycles before you make any progress. But if you have to wait till December to get feel good that you made progress, then you're pretty much done. Your guys are going to slow down. They have to have a fast iteration. That's why you break down the problem, because then you see the solution, you feel good, and then you take the next step. And but at the same time, they have to be held accountable, right? Everyone needs to be. I mean, that's the process of science. It's like no matter how good you are, someone else needs to check your work, and someone else needs to learn from your work. And so that's why we focus on notebooks and things like that, but also why we focus on publishing. In academia, in academic science, there's this notion of publish or perish, and a lot of people complain about that. But in a way, it's good, because what it means is that you're constantly communicating. And the wider you communicate your work, the more feedback you get. So our guys go out and work and give talks at meetup groups. They participate in the broader community so that they can get that feedback. The same way the open source community works. And at the same time, trust, right? Ultimately, they own that product. They own that solution. They make the decisions on it in order to move fast. And that's really important, especially for high-quality data scientist talent, because they care about the work they're doing, and respecting that and trusting that is an important step. Okay, so that's the organization within the team. Now, I think, how do we, we know how to solve the problem. How do we choose what problems to solve? Well, that's definitely asked and answered in partnership with business and product. That's key. So the organization is also a problem to think about. So what we do at Housing is have this sort of a rotation between co-locating with the data science and data team and co-locating with your partners in business and product. And we do that for, different reasons, but mainly it's, there needs to be some coherence, some cohesiveness within the team, because you get that feedback. If you run into a problem with your code, you need someone to give you feedback. You need someone to be like, that's sloppy work, right? And so sitting together is an important part of that. We can't overlook that. But at the same time, you need to be spending time with the partners. So we go out and spend a couple of days every couple of weeks sitting in their offices. So that we're understanding and we're updating them. How is the solution going? Is the business case context changed? Do we need to adapt? And it really, the only thing we found to work is a rotation. Because if you're sitting always with them, you lag. And if you're sitting always with yourselves, you're not useful. Okay. And I just want to quickly run through this. We say data is the new soil, and because a lot of people you would say data is oil, but oil is a non-renewable resource, right? You use it once and it's done. But data is a renewable resource. Data, you use it and then into a product, and then the product collects new data. The way people engage with that, and that brings it in, and it becomes this growth process, and that's I think a really important thing to think about. A lot of times companies just think of data as something they use. They just use. They focus on outward work rather than what can we add that can bring new data back in. Every product should, the way people engage with it should be brought back in. So if we just looked at our supply data and didn't look at how people engaged with it, we wouldn't have that demand side, right? So, and then this is, so I looked at the organization infrastructure. So this is the data infrastructure we want to have. This is the way we think about it. Is that at the center of it, we've got our data. We've got the different products. We've got our inventory. We've got our web stuff. We've got the different stuff we crawl about localities, etc. And then we sit our products on it. And we sit our demand-side products on it. So these are the decision tools we make accessible to our users. And on the industry side, the work we do with banks, or the work we do with developers, for instance, we build out products that sit on it and that let our developers see the same demand stuff we have. That let our developers see the way their competition is working in the locality. How is the industry shaping up in this particular city? And how they react to it gets fed back in. And same with our operations. So all the managing of the data collectors spread across India is using tools that get fed back in, the results get fed back in to the overall data infrastructure. Okay, can you just give me a time check? I wasn't paying attention. Can you give me a time check? Another 15 minutes. Okay, perfect. Then actually, because that's what was requested, 15 minutes for questions. So I'll stop and we'll do some questions. And if we don't have questions, then I'll cover a couple things in more in detail. Yeah.
So I understand that people like me, who are using housing.com to rent a property or buy their, getting their answers from it. But are you using or are property developers, are they coming to you for some insights or data? Or do you have such business plans to sell such stuff?
Yes. So if we go back here, yes. So we just launched our first developer analytics report, which is a dashboard, a web dashboard. So a developer launches a project, say in Navi Mumbai or something, and then they have some marketing and ad type deals with us, where they'll advertise on the site, etc. And then what we do is give them a dashboard, a login that can hold their analytics and show them what kind of results they're getting on their ads, what kind of viewership they're getting, and at different stages of investment on their part, they get more and more detail of information about the competitor, information about general demand, demographic stuff for that locality. Similarly, brokers. So we just built out our first broker app. So brokers can use that to manage their process, and we give them insight as well. And if you look back a couple of slides, you can see one of the products we sell is a broker. Here we go. Yeah, see, so our recommended agent. Okay, so they get a recommended site, they get a broker site, and then they can see the data. We're very much about democratizing data, so they get to engage as well. If you think about our objective here, the analogy would be, we would like to be the Bloomberg terminal for real estate. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
All the insights and exploration that you do is based on the user data and your partnership data with housing.com, right?
No.
Okay. My question was, how do you know that represents the population data?
Yes. Yes. No, that's a good question. Analytics is inference, right? It's always about drawing inference from a subpopulation, a sample, to a larger population, and thinking about that is a core problem. So yes, demand data, our inventory data, locality data, and then there's other ways we can look at larger market phenomena, like where other flats are going, where they're getting listed, et cetera. And we're starting to have partnerships with banks on things like home loans, so we can see how, I'm really pushing for some partnerships with government, because there's a lot of data actually in India where it's meant to be public, it's officially meant to be public, so registrations and things like that, or circle rates, right? The government established price for an area of a city that's supposed to be public, but just they don't have the technology infrastructure. So we're trying to build out some partnerships to help facilitate maybe part of that. The other thing is Housing recently acquired the India Real Estate Forum, which is the largest community real estate forum in India. And so we use all that text. We're looking at how people talk about developers, how they talk about localities, things like that. But after all that said, you still have the inference problem, and it's interesting, it's hard, and fun. So, yeah. Yeah.
So, generally what happens and what I've seen is that multiple brokers will put out a listing for the same apartment or flat. Now my question is, how do you deal or find out that, okay, it's the same actual apartment? And after you found that out, how do you manage three brokers listing the same apartment? Are there three different listings? The same listing with three?
So we've updated our policy recently. It used to be one flat. Now we allow broker and owner to list the same flat, because you can, as a user, you can search for just owner or just broker listed properties. But this deeper problem is there, and this is part of one of the tools here on the bottom side here. So okay, we've got data collectors. They go out, we work with brokers, they work with owners, they use the app, they collect all the data about the flat, right? But there's going to be it's guys all over the country. So how do you manage that process, and how do you manage what you're talking about, which is two kinds. Errors, which could be fraud on the part of the data collector, because they get incentivized to collect flats, so that maybe they just fudge a little bit of stuff, or create fake listings or double listings so that they can get paid. Or error on the error side, maybe brokers are doing something wrong or just making a mistake. So we have our auditing incentive demand supply system that integrates our demand supply work. Okay, so we know what the demand profile is for a particular area, and we connect that with the incentive system. It's a dynamic incentive system for our data collectors. So they're incentivized to collect the kind of flats that are in demand in that particular area. And then on the auditing side, once they've collected that flat, we have basically use algorithms to predict a sample of flats that should be audited. Right? We'll never be able to check all of them. That wouldn't make sense. So we give a subset to our auditing team. They have this dashboard that basically every day gives them a list of flats that should be audited. They call and do whatever manual check they do, and then they input what they found right back into the dashboard so that the algorithm can learn. We can say, we predicted this was an error, and it actually wasn't. Or we missed this kind of error. And one of the ways we think about the error, because errors are human errors, so they can always change. It's not stable. So they'll try one thing, and if they get caught, they'll try something else. So in order to deal with that, we think more about coverage and less about precision. So instead of thinking like having a really high precision, say 9 out of 10 flats were correctly predicted, we'd rather predict 20 and only get 14, because that maximizes the coverage, right? Within limits, because as you approach n, the size of your inventory, right, it's not useful. So.
How do you factor quality as a feature?
Quality as a feature. Yeah, it's a good question. right now, we don't do a very good job of it. One thing we're looking at now doing, which we've already done our first trial run, is thinking about how we can integrate images. So images tell you a lot about life. If you take features like size, number of bedrooms, price, and all of that, and you say, oh, this is part of my recommendation, I'm going to recommend this to the user. It's great. It's the kind of flat they want. And then they don't respond. What we realize is that that's because we're heavy on images. Like we were one of the first that pushed images. That tells you a lot about a flat. And if you get all the right features, and then you see an image where the walls are like falling apart and the floor is really cruddy and like the windows are tiny, none of that's caught in the features, right? Then that's not going to be good. So what we're doing is using Amazon Mechanical Turk to do some initial training, and then we're building out our team to be able to deal with certain things like feature extraction from images, basic low-level. We aim for low-level fruit, so doing things like looking at light opacity. So if a picture is overexposed, for instance, and like even on our photos, a lot of times these data collectors they're not like they don't have an extensive educational background, so they'll take pictures that are angled wrong. So we built out just a little tool on the phone that they have, the smartphone that we give them, that lets them know as they're taking the picture that they should be straighten it out a little bit. So that's how we think about quality.
Are you planning to use text analytics because you are now selling an apartment as a unit, but surrounding apartment, some apartments may not have a road also, but you have a beautiful flat, but there is no road, because that information you can get from the text analytics.
So in that particular case, I guess maybe I don't follow exactly, but we do. But in terms of text, yes. So that's what IREF, the India Real Estate Forum, that's why part of that was for that acquisition, was because there's so much discussion around things like developer corruption, right, holding developers accountable, what the mood is in the real estate space, lots of different things. And yeah, we're starting to do a lot in the text space. So we have a team dedicated to text for IREF. Yeah.
As a person, when you're trying to sell or rent a house, is you're always a little worried about the credibility or the genuineness of the person who's buying from you, right? Is there anything that you've thought of doing in this area in terms of, is there any idea at all that you've got there?
Yeah, so that's a big problem for brokers as well. It's a lot of times why they still like word of mouth, is because they know there's genuine interest. But here's an interesting problem where instead of tackling it from that angle, because there's not as clear a route to solution, we tackle it from another angle, and hopefully that we'll reach that point where we're answering this. And that is the fact that while originally we were much closer to something like a Netflix or an Amazon, like an e-commerce, you're just looking and you're searching and you're seeing flats, right? And there's very little engagement on the side of the user looking. You can basically look for flats and that's it. We realized that the decision process of finding a place to live is much more complex. It takes more time. It's not like choosing what movie to watch, and it's not like choosing what shirt to wear. And none of that process was getting captured on the platform, and we weren't serving any of that process. So that's a huge service gap we could do. So what we're doing now is building out what we call in our solutions cluster. We're building out. We haven't quite named it yet, but it's basically going to be a dashboard that will allow you to share information and then get information right back. So for instance, right now we give you a generic commute time for your local to your local metro stop or bus stop, right? Here, as part of your profile, you can put in your work location and you can get exact commute time, right? Or you can shortlist 4 flats and then systematically use our comparison tool to see what the trade-off of living further out and getting more space is against that commute time or against any other feature that's different on the site. And as we get more of that, as we get more user information, because they're engaging more, we're giving them more value and they're giving us more data, then we'll be able to filter a little bit more on the seller, on the broker side. So it's sort of, that's not the direct purpose, but it's hopefully an outcome. Yeah.
Database for the developer dashboard area.
Yeah.
So do you think at some point in time in the future, with the data that you have, you'll be in a position to tell the developer what the location of his next high-rise or his next property should be?
Yes, I mean, that's definitely the goal. Yeah, and not just developers, but also businesses. So like you have this Make in India campaigns. You got this, like there's a lot of excitement and growth, right? And you have big companies coming in and choosing what city to live in, for instance, right? And it's a serious problem. Like housing, for instance, faces a lot of problem being in Mumbai because historically it hasn't been a tech city, so it's harder to hire engineers, right? Where a company is based affects its future. And so what we'd love to do is be able to do exactly that for developers, but also for businesses, say, and let them know and like team up with them. Help you if you're setting up a new office with 1,000 people or 500 people or something. This is the right area to do it. This is the locality that's coming up. This is where you're going to have accessible flats at the rate, the values that your employees are going to be able to purchase or acquire. Again, the Bloomberg terminals are grand ambition, right? Where all of the information from the industry can be made accessible to people across the industry.
So this is a complete business question. How do you measure? Even before measuring, how do you sort of come up with an expected ROI for any data science project that you run? And finally, how do you measure it?
So that's that slide where I was showing if in partnership with data and product. It's always a tricky question. But you try and have you understand what the short and midterm company strategic objectives is, and then stay in alignment with that, and then understand what the business side, what they think they can sell. So, for instance, the developer dashboard, they work with the business side, the sales team. They work with developers all the time. So they knew, for instance, at first we built this very complex, dashboard, and they were like, no, developers are not going to use that. That's way too much information, or at least it's not visualized in the right way. So we simplified it. And that's the other thing is that's why it's important to iterate rapidly. Just build it, then ship it, then test it. Don't, because otherwise you can get down into the nitty gritty of building exactly what you need, and it ends up being not what you need. So that's another element of it. The other element is, but still preserving our space to do discovery. Because a lot of this comes from the return on investment. That came from a data scientist playing with seeing if he could match rental and resale. It was purely out of discovery. It was not, nobody said, let's do this. It was out of discovery. So we try to balance those things. So I guess that's probably it. Okay, thank you.